Grant Halstead thought moving near Prospect Park would quiet the storm inside him, until he opened his door at 1:43 a.m. and found his neighbor collapsed in the hallway, lips pale, hands trembling, barely able to whisper a name before slipping away. Her 16-year-old daughter, Wren, stood behind her like she'd been practicing silence her whole life. By the time the ambulance headed to New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist, Grant realized this wasn't a one-night emergency. It was a pattern, and somehow he'd just been pulled into the center of it. So what happens when the only person who stays is the one who shouldn't? Like, subscribe and tell me, where are you watching from? Grant Halstead hadn't meant to get involved in anyone's life when he signed the lease for apartment 2B. The real estate agent had pitched the pre-war brownstone on Ocean Avenue as quiet, with character, which he translated as creaky and drafty, but blessedly anonymous. Grant, recently divorced and numb in a way that felt permanent, didn't mind. He'd traded a 3-bedroom in Montclair, New Jersey, for peeling walls and subway rumble outside his window. He told himself that this was recovery, eating grocery store rotisserie chicken from the container, ignoring the stack of unopened letters from his ex-wife's attorney, and falling asleep to Mets reruns on SNY. Then, 6 nights into this new monastic life, he opened his door at 1:43 a.m. to take out the trash and nearly stepped on a body. A woman, his neighbor though they'd never spoken, lay crumpled in the hallway, her skin pale and waxy, hair stuck to her face, one shoe off. She wasn't drunk. Her mouth moved like she was trying to form a sentence underwater. Grant crouched beside her, gently shook her shoulder and asked, "Can you hear me?" She blinked once, then closed her eyes, whispering something that sounded like a name. No one else on the floor stirred. No footsteps, no doors opening. He called 911. While waiting, he heard a door behind him creak. A girl stood there barefoot in pajama pants, watching in silence. Her name, he'd learned minutes later, was Wren, 16, daughter of the woman on the floor. She didn't cry or speak. She only tilted her head slightly, as if calculating whether Grant was a threat. "Just for a few hours," he said aloud, mostly to himself, as the dispatcher kept talking in his ear. "She can stay just for a little while." Wren stepped over her mother's legs without flinching. Inside, Grant's apartment was still half unpacked. Cardboard boxes stacked near the radiator, a folding chair in place of a dining table, and a twin mattress on the floor, like he was squatting in his own life. He pulled the blue throw blanket from the couch. It had been his, even before the divorce, and handed it to her. "You cold?" She nodded once. "Kitchen's through there. I can make something hot if you want." He didn't expect a reply. She looked at him for 3 full seconds before saying, "Soup." He blinked. "Yeah, I've got Campbell's. Chicken noodle." "Okay." Grant warmed the can on the stove, stirring it with a metal spoon, while she stood still in the corner, arms wrapped around herself like she didn't trust chairs. He placed the bowl on the coffee table. She sat, finally, tucking her legs under her. The sound of sirens echoed faintly through the avenue, growing sharper as they neared. "That your mom?" he asked gently. "Yeah." "Is she okay?" Wren didn't answer. She just stared at the bowl. The EMTs arrived in a flurry of black boots and clipped questions. The building's old elevator took too long, so they used the stairs. Wren stepped aside without being asked, folding into herself as 2 strangers examined her mother under the flickering hallway light. "Overdose?" one of them murmured. Grant didn't answer. He felt like he shouldn't be standing there, like his presence made the moment worse. But no one told him to leave, and Wren hadn't moved. He caught the address on the medic's clipboard, New York Presbyterian Brooklyn Methodist Hospital, 2 miles away, and jotted it down mentally without knowing why. As they lifted her mother onto the stretcher, Wren finally asked, "Will they keep her overnight?" One of the EMTs hesitated, then said, "Someone will talk to you there." Wren nodded once, not a flinch, not a tear, just that eerie stillness. When the elevator doors closed with her mother inside, she stared at the space as if watching someone get buried. "You want me to go with you?" Grant offered. She shook her head. "They won't let me in." "Then stay here until someone comes." Her voice was steady when she replied, "No one's coming." There were 12 missed calls on her mother's iPhone, buzzing against the hallway tile. All from the same number, Marcus C. The screen flashed again, vibrating for 2 rings before going silent. Neither of them reached for it. Later that night, after Wren had fallen asleep curled up on Grant's couch, he sat at his kitchen counter staring at his own phone. He searched Marcus Calloway on LinkedIn and found a matching profile. Executive Director of Business Development, Oracle North America, headquartered in San Francisco. Grant didn't know much about tech, but the banner photo, a conference stage in Miami, all lights and logos, told him everything. Marcus Calloway was someone who made big promises with microphones. The kind of man who probably flew Delta Comfort Plus and never turned off his phone, just in case. Grant checked the call log again. All those missed calls, all of them after the ambulance had already left, not one before. The realization made something tighten in his chest. He opened the fridge out of habit, then closed it again. Instead, he scribbled a quick note on a post-it and stuck it to the door for Wren. "Soup's in the fridge. I'll be back by 8G. He almost signed Grant, but something about the initial felt gentler, less imposing. It was strange how quickly you could shift from stranger to protector in the space of one hallway. The next morning, he found Wren awake at the kitchen table, reading the back of the Campbell's can like it was a novel. Her hair was still messy, eyes tired, but she looked aware, present. "I didn't know if you liked toast," he said, offering a piece of buttered rye he'd picked up from the bagel shop on Flatbush Avenue. She accepted it wordlessly. They ate in quiet. "You need to go to school today?" he asked eventually. "PS 321, she replied. "But I'm not going." "They'll call your mom." "She won't answer." Grant didn't push. After breakfast, he offered to walk her back to her apartment. She nodded, and he noticed how she checked the hallway like someone expecting bad news around corners. Her apartment was untouched, coat still hanging from the knob, TV frozen mid-commercial. "You okay being alone for a bit?" he asked. "I've been alone for a while," she said, and closed the door before he could reply. He stood there for a moment, staring at the chipped paint on her frame, before heading back upstairs, feeling like he'd just stepped into something he couldn't name yet. Not a responsibility, not exactly, but something that didn't let him walk away. By nightfall, the hospital called to ask if Wren had any other relatives. Grant explained he was just a neighbor, but the nurse didn't seem surprised. "She listed no emergency contact," she said matter of fact. "We'll keep her under observation another night." The daughter should stay with someone, ideally. Grant hesitated. There were rules about these things. He wasn't family. He wasn't even a friend. But when he called Wren to let her know, she answered on the second ring. "You don't have to explain," she said. "I already packed a bag." That night, as she set her small duffel next to the couch without being told, Grant understood the terrifying truth. This wasn't a one-time emergency. This was a long-standing vacancy that had gone unfilled for years. And whether he liked it or not, he had become the only adult in Wren Calloway's life who was still choosing to stay. When Wren showed up again, it didn't feel like a plot twist, just a shift in gravity. Grant saw her from the window of a laundromat on Flatbush Avenue, dragging a navy Samsonite suitcase through semi-frozen slush. The January wind whipped her coat open, and her hair was longer, darker than he remembered. She wore those white wired earbuds nobody used anymore, but they weren't plugged into anything. He stepped outside, halfway thinking he'd imagined her, until she stopped and said, "Hi, Grant," like they had seen each other just last week instead of 6 years ago. She told him she was in town for a month, voice casual, as if it wasn't strange to return to the place where she'd once disappeared without goodbye. She was 24 now, but carried herself older. shoulders tucked in like someone bracing for an answer that never came. They walked side by side for 3 blocks without speaking, until she asked, "Is the bodega on Sterling still open?" He nodded. "Same guy behind the counter. Still sells expired granola bars." She smiled at that. A real one, brief but visible. And just like that, the distance between them, the years of silence, shrank into something soft and dangerous. They met again 2 days later at Roots Cafe, tucked on the corner of Carroll Street. The kind of place where nothing changed. The same chalkboard menu, same Bob Dylan song on repeat, same chipped white mugs. Wren showed up in a Columbia hoodie and jeans, her laptop in her tote bag, but she didn't open it. "I've been writing about cities that swallow people," she said, stirring honey into her tea. "Didn't realize I was one of them." Grant didn't know how to respond to that, so he just listened. She told him about graduate school at Northwestern, her thesis half-finished, her advisor impatient. "I thought coming back here would help me focus," she said, "but all I do is take the Q train to nowhere and walk around like a ghost." He asked if she was staying with her mother. "Barely," she replied. "She's medicated into silence most days. My dad called once to say he was sorry about something. I'm still not sure what." She didn't cry. She didn't have to. The weight sat between them like a third person at the table. She reached for his hand, then pulled back, brushing crumbs off her fingers instead. "It's weird being back," she said. "You're the only part that doesn't feel imaginary." Over the next 2 weeks, their meetings became routine without ever being called that. They walked around Prospect Park like they used to, sometimes with coffee from Café de Martini, sometimes just talking. She told him she missed the benches more than the buildings. He laughed. Only someone raised here would say that. She started opening up more. About nights she slept with headphones in so she wouldn't hear her mother crying, about never knowing if her father's plane was delayed or if he'd just decided not to come. Grant never offered advice. He just asked questions. And that seemed to be enough. One night, sitting near the entrance to the Brooklyn Botanic Garden, she said, "There were nights I'd look at the light under your door and pretend it meant something. Like as long as it was on, I'd be okay." Grant didn't know what to do with that. It was too much and too late, but also not. He changed the subject, asked about her thesis again. "It's not about cities anymore," she admitted. "It's about invisibility." She smiled without joy. "Bet you didn't know you were a case study." Grant told himself it was okay, that it was still safe. They hadn't crossed any lines. They hadn't said anything they couldn't take back. He could still pretend he was just being supportive, a friend from another chapter. But late one night, after sharing pizza on his couch, half pepperoni, half mushrooms, folded on greasy paper from Luigi's, Wren leaned into him and said, "Do you think some people are only alive because someone saw them once?" He didn't answer. He couldn't. She didn't press. But after she left that night, he sat at the edge of his bed, holding the empty paper plate like it was a relic. He knew the line was blurring. What scared him most wasn't what Wren felt. It was what he was starting to feel in return, something raw and reckless masquerading as care. He stared at his bookshelf, where the copy of The Catcher in the Rye she'd left behind years ago still sat, pages folded, her name written faintly on the inside cover in pencil. He hadn't opened it since she'd gone. That night, he did. The week after, he tried to pull away, declined a few calls, let texts go unanswered. She noticed. "Are you mad at me?" she asked, when they finally met at a quiet bakery on 7th Avenue. "Of course not," he said too fast. She stirred her coffee with the end of her straw. "Then why does it feel like I broke something?" He sighed, rubbing his temple. "Because I don't know where this goes, Wren." She looked at him, calm. What if it doesn't have to go anywhere? What if it already meant something? That line stuck with him for days. What if it already meant something? She wasn't asking for romance, not directly, but she was asking for presence, for someone to stop disappearing. And Grant, who had spent the last decade trying not to be anyone's mistake, felt the weight of her words like a mirror he hadn't asked to look into. Still, he said nothing. He just nodded, and she smiled like she knew he wouldn't answer. And so it continued, walking a tightrope made of memory, longing, and unspoken things. Grant told himself he was protecting her, that he'd know when to pull back. But the truth was, he already didn't know. The way she laughed now, softer, more tired. The way she let silences sit between them without trying to fill them. The way she looked at him not like a father figure or an old friend, but as someone who once mattered, and might still. It didn't feel wrong, but it didn't feel harmless either. On her last night, before supposedly returning to Chicago, they sat again on the same Prospect Park bench they had years ago, when she was 16 and he was still broken in a different way. "I don't think I'm going back," she said quietly, eyes fixed ahead. "Not yet." Grant said nothing. He just nodded, and she leaned her head on his shoulder. For a long moment they stayed like that, no words, no movement, just two people refusing to let go, even if they both knew the cost. The call came at 6:08 p.m. Grant saw the name flash across his phone, Ren Calloway, but didn't answer right away. He was washing dishes, something mindless to quiet the day, and by the time he dried his hands, it had gone to voicemail. No message. Just a missed call and a silence that carried weight. He'd learned by then not to expect closure wrapped neatly. A minute later there was a knock, not loud, not urgent, just asking. When he opened the door, Ren stood there in a wool coat too thin for the freezing wind, eyes swollen, jaw tight. "He cancelled," she said. That was all. Grant stepped aside, and she entered like someone crossing through invisible glass. She didn't take off her coat. She didn't sit down. "I waited 2 hours at the West Side Diner," she said, voice shaking. "He texted at the end, said the flight got delayed, but I tracked it. He never booked it." Grant didn't try to explain what he couldn't fix. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a crumpled receipt from the Metro North ticket machine, Grand Central to Stamford one way. "I thought this time it would be different," she said. "I thought he'd show up." He didn't know whether to hug her or stand still. The rules felt different tonight, looser, sharper. Ren moved closer on her own, the same way someone steps into cold water, slow, determined, knowing it will hurt. She leaned her forehead against his chest, and Grant's instinct betrayed him. His arms hovered, then folded around her gently, like he was holding back a tide. She whispered, barely audible, "I don't want flowers or speeches or grand gestures. I just want someone who stays." For a moment, he let her words settle. Her fingers gripped the hem of his shirt. And in that suspended space, Grant almost let it happen, not because he wanted to take advantage, but because part of him needed it too. The part that still replayed empty rooms, unopened texts from his ex-wife, birthdays spent watching people leave. Ren looked up at him then, and there was no pretense left. Just a girl trying not to be abandoned again. His heart broke for her, and for himself. But love, real love, wasn't always an opening. Sometimes it was the door you didn't walk through. "No," he said softly, fingers gently cupping her shoulders to create distance. "Ren, not like this." She blinked, stunned. "Why?" The word came out hollow. He took a breath. "Because you matter too much to me to let this become something we regret. You don't see it now, but one day you will. And I want to be someone who made you feel safe, not someone who blurred the lines when you were hurting." Her face crumpled then, not in anger, but in that deep, echoing grief that comes from hearing a truth you didn't want, but maybe needed. She stepped back, hands trembling, breath sharp. "You think I'm a mistake waiting to happen," she said. Grant shook his head. "No, I think you're the one good thing that hasn't broken yet, and I won't be the reason it does." The air between them was thick with everything unsaid. She looked around the room like she didn't recognize it anymore, then whispered, "I should go." And he didn't stop her. The door clicked behind her like a final page turning. The next morning, her apartment was empty, gone. No bags, no sound, no sign. Her number returned only a message. "This number is no longer in service." Grant walked back to his place with a slow, sinking dread, like someone realizing too late the meaning of something irreversible. A week passed. Then a month. The guilt sat like lead in his chest, but not because he regretted saying no. It was because part of him still wanted her to come back. Then one Saturday, as he came back from picking up groceries at the Union Market on 7th Avenue, he found Marcus Calloway waiting on the building's front stoop. Dressed in a grey trench coat and holding a bottle of Macallan 12, he stood like a man rehearsing a speech. "I know I don't have the right," Marcus said before Grant even greeted him, "but I wanted to thank you." Grant stiffened. "For what?" "For being there," Marcus replied. "For Wren. I know I wasn't. I know I failed her in ways I can't fix. But she told me once, years ago, that you were the only adult who didn't walk away." Grant said nothing. He took the bottle, nodded once, and shut the door before Marcus could say anything else. Years passed. The apartment stayed the same. Fewer boxes now, more books. Grant started teaching sound design at a community program in Red Hook. Nothing fancy, just weekends. He stopped checking his phone for numbers that wouldn't appear. Until one rainy Thursday in April, inside McNally Jackson Books on Prince Street, while browsing a second-hand copy of Beloved, he turned and saw her, Wren, standing in the aisle, one hand resting on a table of staff picks. Her hair shorter now, the Columbia hoodie replaced by a structured black coat. Her eyes met his without hesitation. "Hey, Grant," she said, simple, like no silence had ever existed. "Hey," he replied, unsure if he could move. They stood in it, the strange stillness of unruined things. "I'm not here for long," she added, "just passing through." He nodded. "Still writing?" "Always," she smiled. "You still teaching?" "A little." They didn't touch. They didn't fall into old patterns. They spoke like people who had once mattered and chose not to forget that. Before she left, Wren pulled something from her bag and handed it to him, a folded envelope with no name. "You can read it later," she said. "I just wanted to say this in person, too." He waited until she was gone, until the street was empty, to open it. Inside was a note written in the same sharp handwriting she had when she was 16. The last line read, "You didn't ruin me. You saved me. And I hope you finally believe that." Oh! Grant sat down on the bench just outside the store, the kind facing Crosby Street, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding for years. He didn't cry. He didn't chase her. He just read the note again, slower this time, like someone holding a fragile truth. The ache was still there, but it wasn't guilt anymore. It was something softer, something earned, the kind of love that didn't need to happen to be real. What did you think of Grant's decision to say no, even when it would have been easier to give in? Do you believe that kind of restraint is love or fear? Drop your thoughts in the comments. On a scale from 0 to 10, how would you rate this story's emotional impact? And if you want more intense, real-feeling stories set in places like Brooklyn, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.